My name is Jack Thorne. For over 3 years, I've been running from the SCP Foundation. This is my story. I held the coffee in both hands and smiled as Sam dozed off in the large, deep booth chair opposite mine. She wasn't accustomed to staying up as late as I was, and even though she'd been brave to try, it was likely that she'd never been able to adapt to my sleep schedule. Sam seemed determined to adapt to my way of living, feeling safest during the night hours, God knows why. After finishing my coffee, I picked up the sleeping Sam up and carried her through the cafe, gingerly walking around the waitress and heading for the door. I was only 2 steps away when Sam woke up with a start, jumping back down to the floor. "Something's wrong," she called out, looking around with her eyes wide open. I lifted my fists, ready for a fight, but I couldn't see anything amiss in the dark, sleepy cafe. "I saw something, but I can't remember what it is." Sam was holding her head, confused and terrified. I sat her down and helped her breathe, hoping she'd remember what she'd seen, but it was gone. We went back to our hotel and went to bed, but Sam didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, we woke up early and packed all of our things into the car. My friend Lee had found us an apartment, so after months spent on the road, Sam and I had found somewhere we could call home. We spent the day unpacking our stuff, and after finishing late in the evening, we went back to the cafe. I tried to talk her out of going, but Sam was determined to return and try to figure out what she had felt the night before. We pulled up outside the cafe and parked the car exactly where we'd parked it yesterday. It was strange. It felt as though the car park had the exact same number of cars as there were last night. Not only that, the cars themselves looked the same. We pushed on the cafe door. The tinkle from the bell the only noise that rang through the air. "Must be senior discount night." Sam chuckled as she made her way over the table we'd been sitting at last night. She was right though. Everyone in the cafe looked really old, so they couldn't be the same crowd that were there last night. We waited for 20 minutes, chatting and having a good time, but no one came to take our order. "This is fun and all," Sam finally said, "but I'm starving." She then stood up and looked around for the waitress. I looked past where she'd been sitting and noticed the old man sitting at the next table. He wasn't talking to his partner. He was just staring off into the distance. His skin seemed really messed up somehow, and his head sat at a really uncomfortable angle. "Oh my God," I whispered aloud. My sentiments caught off by Sam's scream at a realization that everyone in the cafe was dead. I stood up and looked closer. Everyone looked as though they'd been dead for a long time, far longer than only a few hours. "This must have happened after we left last night," Sam sobbed. "If I'd known, I could have warned them." "There's nothing you could have done," I said, taking her hand. "Let's get the hell out of here." I rushed past the tables, not seeing the milkshake puddle that had accumulated beside the table closest to the door. Before I realized what was happening, I slipped back, knocking my head against the table. It hurt like hell, but luckily I hadn't knocked myself out. I stood up quickly, shaking milk off my coat and heading once again for the door, but when I pulled Sam's hand, she didn't follow. Sam was staring wide-eyed at an acid stain in the wall that was growing as we watched. A loud hissing sound came from the stain as it grew, consuming the wall as it spread. Before long, a very old and decomposed face emerged from the wall. The face burst into a lipless smile upon seeing us, and soon its entire body had stepped forth from within the wall and was standing facing us. What looked to be a very old, very dead man was staring at us. His torso was dark as though it was filled with congealed blood. I'd never seen anything like this in my life. "We very much have to get the hell out of here," I said, after which we ran out the door and into the car. The creature didn't make any attempt to follow us. It just stared with milky eyes as we tore out of the parking lot. We sped down the road as fast as we could, Sam pushing sweaty hair off her face and breathing deeply. "Fuck! Stop the car!" she shouted. The next second, a familiar hissing sound filling the car. A deep stench of acid and rotten meat filled the vehicle as I pulled the car to the side of the road, and we both jumped out. We ran out of the car and down the road, not thinking, just running, until Sam finally stopped me and held my hands, crying. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "Listen to me," she screamed back. She held my face and looked into my eyes. "Left, left, right, 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 left," she said. She then screamed as the old man appeared out of nowhere, grabbing her around the torso and pulling her sharply away. It was over in a flash and a scream. Sam was there and then she was suddenly gone. I was standing in the middle of the highway completely alone, feeling a mixture of terror and fury. Sam had been taken away by this old man, and I had to get her back any way that I could. Lee was fast asleep when I started pounding on his door. I'm sure I must have scared the life out of him, but I was desperate. After he let me in, I sat at his kitchen table and explained everything that had happened. We then spent the next hour poring over his SCP Foundation documents until we figured out what we were dealing with. "Let's take my car," Lee said with determined grit. We then raced out of his house and into his car. Lee drove us back to the cafe where it all began. Within a few hours of sitting at the booth with Sam, I was now sitting with Lee. The air was thick with tension and it was now beginning to smell like corpses. "How do we convince him to come back?" I asked. "I'm so sorry," Lee replied before brandishing a knife he'd been hiding in his pocket and stabbing it through my hand. The pain was unbelievable. It exploded through my hand and tore up my arm. The knife had pinned my hand to the table, and blood was now pouring through the table and dripping onto the ground. I looked at my friend, unable to believe what he'd done to me. The wall began to ooze, and the old man stepped out of his acid pool once again, walking towards us with his arms outstretched. Lee closed his eyes, then stood up and gestured for me to follow him. His eyes were glowing through his eyelids as he concentrated deeply. With a shaking right hand, I pulled the knife out of my left hand, tossing it to the floor. I then stood and walked to where Lee was standing. Lee put his hands on my shoulders, and at the moment the old man touched Lee, we were both pulled into another dimension. "I wasn't sure this was going to work," Lee said as he rubbed his head. We were sitting in what looked like a white maze, our every word echoing off the walls. "You want to explain yourself?" I asked, ripping a strip of my shirt and wrapping my hand. "The creature is attracted to pain and suffering, especially that of someone it's attacked before and didn't kill. I knew you'd suffer more if you didn't see it coming." I raised an eyebrow as a response. "I manipulated the energy the creature wields to get us here, and can do the same to get us back, but only for the next few minutes." Lee's eyes were still closed and glowing from beneath his eyelids, and we both knew that if the glow ran out, we'd be stuck here until the creature decided it was done with us. "We're in a freaking maze," Lee cried out in despair. "Which way do we go?" It was that question that made me burst out into a smile. "What the hell are you grinning about?" Lee asked in disgust, but I didn't answer. I just ran through the corridor immediately to my left. I then turned left again, then right, and finally left, and then there she was. Sam's eyes were hollow, and her face pale, but she was okay. She was lying on the floor of the maze in a fetal position. "Lee, now!" I yelled out, holding Sam tightly. Lee yelled as his eyes burned brightly, engulfing us in light before the maze melted away, and we appeared once again in the cafe, which was now crawling with police officers.
"Hey, we've got 3 survivors!"
The nearest one called out as I put my hand onto Lee's shoulder and melted all 3 of us into the shadows right before the officer's eyes. "Hey, what was that, Johnson?" a nearby officer asked, but Johnson just stared, unable to believe what he just witnessed. I materialized us at the hospital, checking Sam in for an overnight stay and heading over to the emergency room with Lee. "Do you think that thing is going to keep tracking us?" I asked Lee as we sat in the emergency room waiting for a doctor. "It may have known that we'd escaped back to the cafe, but I doubt it was able to follow us once you did your little shadow trick. But I could stab you again if you want to find out," Lee joked. "You're a bastard for doing that, but thank you," I said. "This creature is just the beginning," Lee said, becoming more serious. "SCPs are attacking more often. They're being driven to desperation as the Foundation's hunt intensifies." "I am not joining your SCP police squad," I joked, as a doctor called me in to be fixed up. "Think about it," Lee called out before turning and leaving. "I don't need a job," I thought as the doctor inspected my hand. "What I need is a drink."
Stop till I hear him say